Please welcome the woman who has inspired people around the country to join the party, Dr. Jill Stein of Massachusetts. Jill, thanks for running.
Well, it's really great to be here, and I feel like I'm here to be inspired by you, which is the reason that I'm in the Green Party. And I find at every place that I go to, I'm meeting more Greens every time who just affirm for me why this is absolutely the right place to be at absolutely the right time, that all of us have a really critical role that we've already played in bringing us to this very historic moment. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Okay, all right, great. Yeah, and I mean, it feels like it is such an honor and a privilege that we are where we are right now. And we didn't get here by coincidence. We got here because of the work that the party and other activists on a similar vein have been inspired by for decades, really. We've been doing the hard work, and suddenly history has caught up to us, and this really is an incredible moment now where democracy and justice are really breaking out all around us, from the democracy revolutions in the Middle East to the uprisings in Madison and throughout Wisconsin, and the Occupy protests all across the nation. It feels like, you know, in many ways, we are at this incredibly powerful moment. And when people are also now breaking away from the establishment political parties in record numbers, that you put that all together, and it's like this election is a powerful tipping point to start taking back this promise of our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that we have been talking about for quite some time. That time has arrived. This is our moment. So thank you for bringing us here. And as you know, we need to make this a tipping point because for the planet and the people and the economy that depend on it, we've hit a breaking point. And we're all aware of that in so many ways, from the climate crisis that we face to the unraveling of the economy and the ever-expanding war. We're really at the breaking point where we need to turn this around, and thankfully we can turn this around, and we couldn't have a better moment to be doing that. The political establishment, sometimes called Democratic and sometimes called Republican, but all basically moving us relentlessly in the same direction, that establishment has basically given us crisis after crisis. And I think we all know these crises all too well. And it's important when people express their self-doubts about democracy and whether or not they can, do they dare to actually participate in their democracy and stand up for who we are and what we need. One of the things I do is just point out that these crises we're in have not just been brought to us by the Republican Party. It's been a bipartisan collaboration. And Barack Obama has been very much a part of these crises that we are now facing. Most of them not started by him, but participated in by him, embraced, and in many cases expanded. So everything from the massive bailouts for Wall Street, the layoffs for Main Street, the declining wages for workers, the attacks on Medicare and Social Security, the epidemic of housing foreclosures, and the expanding wars for oil. The president has participated in all of those policies and expanded every single one of them. They are privatizing education. They are dismantling our civil liberties in an extremely alarming way, and we'll come back to that in a moment. They're rolling back racial justice with this massive prison industrial complex and the very racist war on drugs. They are plundering the environment, and most recently we've seen the president embrace drill baby drill and open up our national our national lands and our offshore areas for drilling. We've seen continuing mountaintop removal, an all-out embrace of fracking by the White House, and an expansion of nuclear power. So, you know, in environmental terms, both parties have very much collaborated on the crisis that we're in, and in plunging us into this climate crisis, particularly with the undermining of the international agreements at Durban, and the President's recent celebration of the building of the Keystone Pipeline and the beginnings of that pipeline. So in every way, this has been very much a bipartisan effort, and we are in crisis. But the wonderful thing is that people are standing up in a way that we haven't seen really, the world hasn't seen in generations. And we are very much a part of that effort. And thanks to the likes of you, people are standing up, and we are providing the leadership. We as Greens and we as activists and we as the grassroots are really pointing the direction that we need to go in, that will never be provided by the insiders and the defenders of business as usual inside of Washington, D.C. So this movement that we are a part of for democracy and justice, it is alive and well at the grassroots. It deserves to have a voice in this election and a choice in the polls in November, so that people aren't walking into the polls and having to pull the lever for one candidate or another who are all sponsored by Wall Street and K Street, because we will be the only alternative on the ballot, and thanks to you, we will be on the ballot, we hope, as Ben said, in 46 or 48 states. Is that better now? Okay, sorry about that. So, by giving people a choice to actually vote for a people-powered campaign and a people-powered candidate, we enable people not to vote for that corporate-sponsored candidate, because doing so means basically giving a mandate to 4 more years of Wall Street rule. And that is what you would call really throwing away your vote. So, how do we get there? And I should add, voting for us for a Green Party campaign means actually voting for the kind of future, the just and sustainable future that we actually deserve. So how do we get there? As president, I will, as a highest priority, work to deliver a Green New Deal for America. And that Green New Deal basically is an emergency program to provide 25 million jobs and put 25 million people back to work. That means ending unemployment, ending the recession, jump-starting the green economy for the secure future, and putting a halt to climate change. This Green New Deal was inspired, obviously, by the New Deal that helped us out of the Depression in the 1930s, and it's an integrated program that would impact both our economy, so it's economic reforms, it is financial reforms, and it is also democracy reforms, because we need democracy if we're going to be able to implement these new policies that the public very much wants. In order to reflect the public's consensus around these policies, we need to reform our democracy so that the public will can actually be reflected. And so the kinds of jobs that would be provided then are the traditional jobs in the so-called green economy. That means jobs in clean renewable energy, which also makes wars for oil obsolete. Jobs in sustainable local agriculture, in clean manufacturing, and in public transportation. So these are the jobs that make our communities sustainable And in the Green New Deal, it's actually the communities who decide what kinds of jobs they need. So it puts them in charge of actually customizing the Green New Deal for their community and deciding what they need to make them sustainable, not just ecologically, but also economically and socially. They would all be covered by the Green New Deal. So that includes the jobs in social services, in healthcare, teachers, daycare workers, elder care and senior care, substance abuse prevention and rehabilitation, violence prevention, all those things that our communities need. This is what we should be promoting. So these jobs would be nationally funded but locally controlled, and a whole variety of jobs, a spectrum of jobs, including both public works and public services, as well as worker-owned cooperatives and community cooperatives and small businesses as well. This is about jump-starting a whole new economy that's not just to get us out of the recession, but actually to transition us into a sustainable and healthy economy for the long haul. And this, of course, distinguishes us from the jobs programs that are being provided by the White House or by Congress, which have generally been tax breaks, usually for big business and for the wealthy. And as you probably know, tax breaks do not create jobs. We know how to create jobs. This is how we got out of the Great Depression, or at least most of the way out of it. So this is not some academic hypothetical idea. This is a real program that actually works, puts real people back to work in real jobs. There's no excuse not to do that now. And of course, it takes a Green Party to do that, because the corporate-sponsored parties wouldn't think about ending unemployment. And that's what we're going to do, actually, is end unemployment, period. The corporate-sponsored parties can't do that because their sponsors, their corporate sponsors who pay their bills, use unemployment and the threat of unemployment to keep wages down and keep their profits up. And unfortunately, they are accomplishing both of those things. Wages, real wages, have been steadily going down for 30 years, and they are still going down, even as corporate profits continue to skyrocket and reach all-time highs. So it really takes a Green Party to make this kind of change, and that's what we're going to do. And I just want to reiterate that this is such an exciting moment, because this is begging to be done. This is what working people want to be done and are demanding to be done, but there's this complete disconnect between what people want and need and what the corporate political structure is willing to provide. And that's why the Green New Deal not only changes our jobs and our economy, but it also changes our financial system so that we can actually come up with the money to make this happen and the financing to make it happen, and also fundamentally changes the rules of our democracy to actually make it a democracy. So how would that work? Well, in the realm of finance, for one thing, we are going to stop the big bank bailouts and the corporate giveaways to the tune. And as you know, this is not small change we're talking about. It's not just the TARP program, which is the off-quoted figure of some $800 billion. It was actually more like $12 trillion, or maybe 16 trillion, depending on how you count it. But when you add up all the free loans and the giveaways, this was an incredible amount of money that went into the bailouts, and that is still going into the bailouts. Even after the President's State of the Union address, remember, where he said no more bailouts? What did he do? He turned around and gave another $25 billion bailout, basically, for the robo-signing deal with the big banks, basically giving them a free ride, insuring them against further liability. And it wasn't $25 billion that they paid. It was really more like a slap on the wrist of $5 billion. The rest will be you know, will be on our backs as taxpayers as usual. So we have a very different idea of about, and more recently, the follow-on to that, you may have heard of this criminalization of protests, this H.R. 347, which was passed with hardly a whimper or even the bat of an eyelash by the corporate press that seems oblivious to the fact that this was passed, and it wasn't just passed, it was passed overwhelmingly. And what an incredible indictment of both parties. It was only 3 Republicans, actually, in the House who dared to vote against it. And this is the law that basically can change the ground right under your feet. So if you are at a demonstration, the ground you're standing on may be suddenly declared a site of special national security, and without your knowledge, you have become a felon for violating that special national security, which might be granted at a sports event or a Hollywood event. Whatever the president and the security associations decide is of great importance, suddenly you are very much at risk for simply being on the ground that you are standing on, and you can be imprisoned for up to 10 years for it. So this is just a staggering development and is a real, what shall I say, it's just a real warning cry that all of us need to go back to our friends and our colleagues, and each of us needs to be a sort of Paul Revere, you know, that the redcoats are coming, and in fact they are on their way, and we all need to be standing up now in every way possible, including in the voting booth. It's not enough just to vote with your feet. It's time to start voting with your vote as well for all of those things that we are working for out there in the street as well. I would mention also a voter bill of rights, including as part of the democracy reforms that we'll be promoting through the Green New Deal, and that we will implement. If we get to the White House, we will implement this. And I just want to comment briefly, how will we implement it? People often ask me that question. So if you wind up in the White House, how exactly are you going to govern with Democrats and Republicans? Well, the answer to that question is that the real people who govern this country are not those who sit in the halls of power. They are the everyday working people out in the street. That's truly the engine of our democracy. And the president, in my view, is not so much the commander-in-chief as it is the organizer-in-chief, who owes it to the voters of this country to inform them and empower them with each critical upcoming vote about what is going to be voted on, what is the bill number, and what is at stake. What are the 2 or 3 critical talking points so that they can get in touch with their elected officials, with their congressmen and women and their senators, and instruct them, which is what we are supposed to do as voters. Our elected officials are supposed to be taking instructions from us, not from the lobbyists and their corporate sponsors, but from us. And in the absence of our pressure, our communications, they will fill that void. But as organizer-in-chief, as president, a Green president will be empowering you to be the driver of how we will move forward. So this is how we will make those changes that we badly need to make without worrying whether it's Democrats or Republicans who have bought their way into the halls of power. So we will take money out of politics. We know how to do that. That is not rocket science. We will pass public funding for elections, and we will make it impossible for lobbyists to buy elections and to buy candidates and to contribute money. It can just be taken out, period. This is not rocket science. And in that voter bill of rights, we will make sure that everyone has the right to vote, that these voter ID laws will not be allowed to restrict people of color, low income, elders, students, to try to keep them away from the polls. We will put an end to restrictions on voting rights. Everyone has a right to vote. We will ensure that all the votes are counted and that every voter has the right to a hand-marked paper ballot so that there is a record. And we can ensure the validity and the integrity of our elections. And to peek at my notes here. Yes, and that these votes are counted within a system that actually makes our votes meaningful. So that we do away with this winner-take-all plurality voting system that allows someone who might get 30% of the vote to basically take all of the power that comes from our votes. We need a voting system that actually reflects the will of the voters. And we can do that through what's called an instant runoff system or a ranked choice voting system. Are people familiar with that? So in ranked choice, you just rank your choices, and it takes the fear out of voting. We need to be able to vote our values and not worry about the fear. Also through proportional representation. There are voting systems that are used in most of the democracies around the world, and we need to catch up with them and have a real democracy in this country. A couple other quick mentions of policies that we will be promoting if we have the honor of serving in the White House. We will bring the troops home from these immoral and illegal wars, which are proliferating by the day. So we will bring them back, including the security contractors in Iraq. We will bring them back from Afghanistan, and we will bring the drones back from Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia, where they are basically conducting illegal, undeclared wars that are only making us less secure and recruiting more people to the cause of Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. So we will have a foreign policy based not on militarism, but on international law and human rights. That is the only way to move forward. We have seen in Iraq and Afghanistan what happens when you try these policies. It doesn't work. We will put our immigration policy on the right footing to make it consistent with human rights and economic justice. The real problem with the influx of undocumented immigrants is NAFTA. It is the destabilization. Thank you. It is the destabilization of these economies. We have created an enormous migration of economic refugees. That is how we fix this problem. And in the meantime, we also need to create a welcoming path to citizenship for the immigrants who are here, who are a critical part of our communities and our economies. We are all immigrants in this country, with few exceptions. And finally, we will legalize marijuana because it is a drug which is dangerous, because it's illegal. It's not illegal because it's dangerous. So these are all common sense policies. These are all policies that are supported by large majorities in polls. Why don't we have them? Well, I think we know the answer to that. It's because we don't have a functioning democracy. But part of that is this problem that many people who agree with these policies are afraid to vote for them. That there has been a very well-funded, conscientious campaign of fear that has been conducted, especially for the past 10 years. It's a fear campaign that tells us we dare not stand up, we dare not open our mouths, we dare not be heard, we need to vote our fears, not our values, and go along to get along. Well, what's different now than 10 years ago, excuse me, is that we now have about 10 years of experience with this illustrious policy, and we now definitively know the answer is in. Silence is not an effective political strategy. How's that lesser evil thing working out for you? Your job, your health care, your student debt, etc. It's not working out so good. And I do have to mention one issue that I neglected to mention, and that is student debt. I got to jump back to that for a second, because as you know, this is a huge issue too, and we actually believe, with good reason, that it is students that we need to bail out and not banks. So, you know, that's about $1 trillion. It's not very much compared to what we've already given the banks. If we found a way to do it for the crooks who caused this problem, we can find a way to do it for the students who are really our ticket to a sustainable future. Our economy needs them. We need to bail them out. We also need to make public higher education tuition free. We did it with the GI Bill, and we got back $7 for every $1 we put in. So we can do this, and we will. So this is part of what we need to vote for, not just with our feet, but actually with our votes in the voting booth, because muzzling ourselves and not voting for it guarantees that not only will it not happen, but that the opposite will happen. We will be making education, like healthcare, like jobs, like housing, just absolutely out of reach and unattainable for 99% of our citizens is where we're going. So instead of silence and fear, which is what that fear campaign is all about, we want to answer that with voices and with values. And fundamentally, we will speak back to this politics of fear, which has brought us everything we're afraid of. You know, all those things we were supposed to be quiet so that we wouldn't get more war, so that we wouldn't get the meltdown of the climate and all these terrible policies, all these carbon-spewing policies. We were supposed to be quiet because we were going to elect the guy that wasn't going to do that, right? But what happens when you're quiet? You know, democracy does not have then a moral compass. It must have a compass of values that only comes from a public interest political party and public interest campaigns like what we're doing. If we're not in it, it's nothing but corporate spin, and that's exactly what we'll get. So that's what you say back to people when they tell you, I want to vote for you, but I'm afraid. You tell them, you just remind them, you just open their eyes to where the politics of fear has brought us. It has brought us everything we're afraid of. We need to answer that politics of fear with the politics of courage. That's what we're about, and that's what the history of progressive politics has been about. It's not just been movements, social movements, movements in the street. It has been that, but it has also been electoral movements and independent third parties that have helped articulate that message and that demand. Because in the words of Frederick Douglass, power does not concede without a demand, never has, never will. And part of what we do as the Green Party, or as any independent, non-corporate third party does, it articulates that demand without which power does not concede. So it's not only okay to stand up and vote for ourselves and our future, it's essential that we do it. Because if we don't, you have an unmitigated slide to the right. And that's what we're doing now. When you leave it to the corporate parties to duke it out among themselves, it's a competition for who can run for the money. And so we're just lurching to the right. We need to be there, regardless of the outcome of the election. We need to be there to be that counterweight. And especially in a time like this, when the public is so intensively searching for what we're about, we need to stand up, stand tall, stand proud, be heard, and take our democracy back. So basically, I'm here not to ask for your vote, but to ask for your leadership in this campaign and in this democracy, because it is time for us to do that. We are at this breaking point on our economy, in our education system, our healthcare, our climate, our planet, international law, and human rights. We are all at the breaking point. It's time for us to stand up, as we have been, but to stand taller, prouder, and louder than we ever have been, It's time for us to run as many candidates as we can, and I want to acknowledge our Senate candidate in the room, and to thank him. Is it David?
Ken.
Ken. Welzer?
Walski.
Walski. Okay, Ken Walski. And I also want to thank Steve Welzer for stepping up to the plate as our co-chair. I want to thank all the people in the room, and I know there are many who are doing the hard work to keep our parties moving forward as treasurers, as secretaries, as co-chairs. This is the tough work that it takes, and I want to thank all the others of you who are doing the hard work that you're doing, and I know that's what it means to be green. We are not the bystanders in a spectator sport here. We are the ones who know that this is all about what we do. Our future is in our hands. Our democracy is in our hands. So I thank you for being the ones to turn this breaking point into a tipping point so that we can start now taking back the promise of our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that we deserve and that really is in our reach. Thank you so much.